This podcast is brought to you by Legacy Capitals, LLC, offering legacy coaching and consulting to high net worth clients and the advisors who serve them. In this episode, I interview Keira Murphy, owner of Jumpstart Genealogy and head of the middle school at St. Edward's School in Vero Beach, Florida, about how researching our family histories can strengthen our family legacy. Please enjoy. Hello everyone, I'm here with Keira Murphy, who I got to know really well through St. Ed's Middle School. She is the head of the middle school where my children attend. And what I learned about her fairly recently, about a year ago, is that she also has an amazing side job that she does that I really think our listeners would be very interested in and gain a lot of information about, and really the impact involved in what she does, which is investigating, researching people's genealogies. And so I brought her here today to talk to us a little bit about what she does, her passion for this, and how it can help us in our efforts to pass on our legacy to our loved ones.
Yep. Thanks. I think we both are interested in preserving family legacies, so it's natural that we came together. You know, I grew up in a family where both of my parents grew up in their towns that their generations after generations had lived in. Mm. So whenever I went to see my grandparents, there were pictures on the wall and there are street names named after them. And we would go visit the cemeteries where you would see family after family and interesting and familiar names. Mm. So I heard stories all the time when I was younger about aunts and uncles and cousins and trying to keep that all in my head. I was really interested in learning more about these people and what happened to them. So as I became older and became an educator, learned that the best education is a cross-discipline education. And when I worked at a school in South Carolina called Aiken Prep School, they had a grandparents' day that many schools have, and we have it here at St. Edward's as well. But just about every school that I know of has some sort of grandparents' day, tries to make those connections with different generations. Back in 2004, Aiken Prep School had a grandparents' day. My middle son, Kevin, was in second grade. I remember it vividly. And we invited my father to come down to South Carolina. And the great thing about that program is that they asked the grandparents to bring some sort of artifact from their childhood that they could then tell the story to the students. My father brought a coconut that his father, my grandfather, had sent from the South Pacific in World War II. Wow. And back then, I don't know if you can do it anymore, I doubt that you can, but back then you could send anything in the mail. Wow. So there was actually a letter written from my grandfather to my father on a coconut, and they put it in the mail. And so my father had always kept this, and so he was able to tell the story of my grandfather's military service in World War II to this whole new generation of students, including my children. I learned a lot too about my grandfather, but in a fun and interesting way that interwove history. Yeah. And it all started to click. Mm-hmm. And later that night, I remember it very well, that night, my father and I were talking about the experience and maybe how he would come back the next year and what else he could bring. Right. And Ancestry.com was just coming on. You know, the internet back in the early 2000s was just really starting to grow. And I said, let's hop on and see. Mm-hmm. Let's see what it's all about. So we did, and all of a sudden, this information came to us so quickly. We were able to see census records. We were able to see some birth records, death records. It's expanded millionfold since then. Yeah. But even back in 2004, there was enough to get us hooked. Awesome. Yeah. And the information kept coming to us. And I realized then and there that my passion for education, about cross-curricular projects, and my family history, what I knew already and how I could expand that, it all came together. I was done. I was hooked and ready to go, and wanting to know how I could then bring that into the classroom. Yeah. That's really been my passion since then. This is maybe my favorite story, and I know it's just a piece of paper that I have printed off, but it's a portrait of my grandmother. Okay, so my grandmother is Ruth Osborne, and she was born in 1911 in a small town in West Virginia called Bancroft. Okay? Bancroft was a coal mining town in West Virginia. And she lived in a number of different houses, typically on the wrong side of the tracks. Okay? Fast forward to about the year 2000. My grandfather had just passed away, and my father and my aunt decided to go on a roots tour. They decided to go to different parts of West Virginia and just learn more about their family history, to get in context, to find the houses that their parents had grown up in, and to try to just go back to the places that they had always heard about, the stories that they had heard about as kids. So they decided to find my grandmother's house in Bancroft. Okay. And they went there, again, I think it was about 2000. And, my father is a banker kind of guy. So, he's probably tootling around in his tweed suit and, leather patches on his elbows. My aunt is very put together and sophisticated as well. And so they're driving around Bancroft, which is still a pretty depressed area in West Virginia. And they arrive at the house where my grandmother had lived at one point in time, I believe, with her grandmother. So it was a house that had been in the family for quite a while. But it was definitely not a great part of town, okay? But my dad and my aunt decided to buckle up, and they went to the front door, and they were just really interested in seeing who was there, if it was still in the family, because it had been in the family for generations, and just try to get a sense of it. And my father tells the story much better than I can, but they knocked on the door and they heard some rustling on the inside, and all of a sudden the door swings open, and here's this huge guy, beard, I kid you not, overalls, no shirt on, and basically saying, what do you want? What are you doing here? And my dad and my aunt are like, oh, I'm sorry. But somebody got up the nerve, I think it was probably my aunt, got up the nerve to say, our mother used to live here, and we're just wondering if we can look around, if we can go to the back, if we could just look around, because we've heard so much about this place. Right. And supposedly this man said, stay right here. Okay? So he left for a little bit. They're still on the front porch. He comes back and says, follow me. Oh, gosh. Okay? So they don't really know what they're doing. So they followed him through the house, out the back, into a shed. They were really nervous at this point in time. And the man goes into the shed and pulls out what I believe was a milk crate, some sort of box. Okay? And in this box was a framed portrait of my grandmother. So the actual thing of this. Wow. And this tough, grisly looking man started to weep and said, everybody's always made fun of me for keeping this, but I knew somebody would come back for her someday.
Oh my gosh. What a beautiful story.
Well, they all start crying. And so evidently, when my grandmother had lived at this house, when packing up, she had left a box behind. Okay. And the families that had lived in that house ever since, now this is back from the 1920s to the year 2000, had kept the box. Right? Had the forethought to say, somebody might want this someday. Right. And so it's this beautiful portrait of my grandmother when she's about 18 years old that nobody had ever seen before. Oh my gosh. Beautiful. And because of this man and other people who had lived in that house just said, somebody will come back. It's important. Somebody will do this. They were finally able to get my grandmother's portrait back into the hands of her children. Every research project, everything that you ever do, you remember back when you were doing research projects in history or science or whatever, it starts with a question. It really does. It's as basic as that. What is your research question? It can be a simple question. When was my great-grandfather born? It could be a more complex question. Why did my ancestor come to America? So it really can run the gamut there from simple to very complex, but it starts with a question. And the biggest misnomer, I think, is that go on the internet and everything's right there. It's not. You really have to break things down, and you have to continually ask yourself those questions about who, what, where, when, why, and how. It seems basic, but it's absolutely true. There is a lot of information on the internet. There's no question about that. But being able to have that human touch, being able to make the connections, can't happen on a computer. You have to be able to take a piece of information and infer what that might have meant at that particular time. Not everything is going to just come at you, so you really are telling the story. So we keep doing the research, we keep moving forward. If other questions pop up, which it always does, then I flip the page, I put the new question over here, and I go back and let's stay on track. It's very easy to get off track. And you just keep doing that. You might need to reach out to people. We talk to librarians and archivists and other people in the community all of the time. That's really where the internet, the communication comes in really well. Because it's so easy to connect. You don't have to write that letter and wait for a month to get a response anymore. You can send off a quick email. It might be midnight, to a librarian. They get it at 8 o'clock the next day, and maybe they can help you out pretty quickly, maybe not. But it does take time, but it takes that perseverance to keep moving through layer after layer, trying to put that story together. It is. I mean, it is a mystery. Obviously, there's a question. And if somebody's asking the question, they don't know what the answer is. So we are trying to, again, figure out what is known. That interview, that initial interview that I always do is really important, because what do you know? What do you think you know? What are the rumors? What is the long-held proposition in your family? What are they telling you? What's the conflict? So you have to do that initial interview to kind of figure out where you're coming from. But to be able to solve the mystery is incredible, because you start with what you know, and you go through this series of questions. The process is called an exhaustive search. And you go until you have looked at enough resources that you have looked and feel comfortable with how many different pieces of evidence you have. Are they all saying the same thing, or are there conflicts in it? And then you come to a resolution. There is never going to be 100% absolutes. There's always going to be that little bit of leeway here or there. But if I, as a researcher, am working on a project for you, and I can show you that I have done this exhaustive research, I have looked in every place that I can possibly imagine looking. I have reached out to people. I've done my research. I've looked at books. I've looked whatever it is, and I can present to you with a reasonable confidence that this is the answer. Then I feel very good. But I'm always going to tell you, if something else comes in, we're going to take a look at that new piece of information as well. So the skeletons in the closet can be the thing that drives the research. Skeletons in the closet can be something that is discovered in the research. And every researcher, every person who is in this has got to understand that you need to let the client know what's happening. You need to allow them to process everything. But how you present it to them really is going to be the key. If you just say, hey, guess what? This happened, there's no time to process, because it's not in context. So what I think is probably the most loving way, I don't know what else to say this, how else to say it, is that if you come across something as a researcher that could be controversial, that could be unflattering, you have to put it in the context of the time period. You have to understand what's happening in the world, why that might have happened, or if, let's say, a client has asked me to do a project for a parent, which is something that I get a lot, right?
As a gift.
As a gift, that a birthday gift or whatever. Then if something comes up, many times I'll ask the client, hey, you know what, I came across this. Do you think that this is something that your parent can handle? Okay. So I'm always telling the client, but I want to make sure that we do this tastefully. Another example would be, I recently did some work for a client that had Georgia farmers in their ancestry. We knew that we were going to come across slavery. There was really no way around that. And it's always a sensitive topic. How can you relay to your client that they were part of the slavery system? What I was able to do, though, because I knew that this was going to be sensitive to them, I was able to also do extra research on the ancestor, and I found a will. And in this will, he named every single slave that he had by name, by age, and what he was doing in terms of their life after he died, and how he was taking care of them after he died. So I was able or needed to tell them about the slave owning aspect of the family, but I was also able to put it in the context of your ancestor was not a bad guy.
Right.
He took care of these people by name. He knew them. He cared about them. And so cushioning that a bit in context of history was really important.
And that changed his legacy, this man's legacy, from just slave owner to a person who had relationship with the people that he had as slaves.
It's not just this picture, but it's the diary that my grandmother kept while my grandfather was in World War II. And so she kept a handwritten diary. And then my father had the forethought, because he's kind of into this as well. So this is a picture of my grandmother and my father. So my father has put this together. But this is my grandmother's handwritten diary that she kept while my grandfather was in the service during World War II. And then alongside this are the letters that my grandfather wrote to my father while he was in the Army.
Oh my gosh.
And so stationed in the Pacific. Wow. So we have this timeline of original thoughts and ideas.
Right.
So trying to put together, let's say, the life of my grandmother, I have this portrait, which is unbelievable. I have her writings. I have my memories. I have what I can find online. But what I have online could never, ever give us the depth and the importance of what these things give us. So it's important to go beyond, getting back to an earlier question, it's so important to go beyond what you can just find on the computer. It's not all there. That will give us some support, but asking and searching and listening to the stories and writing them down, that's what it's all about.
So you're inspiring me and maybe convicting me slightly, because I've moved so many times in life that it can be really easy for me to be like, and my husband Ryan's more of a pack rat than I am. More sentimental about things than I am, and so I'm always like, we get one box of sentimental things to keep, right? No basements in Florida.
Right.
But you're really speaking to the need to save some of these things, because generations from now, and I think the move to digital, everything digital, it gets away from that as well.
It does.
Pictures and all of that, right?
It does. So you could talk to my husband, because we look at the boxes upon boxes that we have in our garage, and every time there's a hurricane, we have to bring them inside. And I try to catalog them, and I try to digitize things, but I can't let this go. Just being able to hold this, I can't let it go. And books like this.
Oh yeah, bring that up. I can't wait to hear about this.
So this is an old time ledger. And like I said, people like paper. They like the frayed edges and everything. But this is kind of fun. This actually did not come through my family.
Okay.
I was doing some research back in Wayne County, Indiana, which is where my mom is from.
Okay.
It's on the eastern part of Indiana. A little antique store was open. And so I decided to waste some time and go through the antique store, which of course I love.
Yeah.
But in one of the booths, it was one of those places where people have booths and they can do some independent businesses in there. She had it, or whomever had it set up almost like a den or a study. There was a desk and there were bookshelves and there was a couch. So everything was for sale, but it was set up like that. And so I was wandering through, I was looking at the books, and on the desk was this ledger. Now, it was set up as if it was an old-time study.
Yeah.
But I started looking through this just thinking it was a prop, really.
It's not.
And I opened up this, and somebody has used it as a scrapbook.
Yeah.
And I must have opened it up to this page here because I noticed this. Eliasson writes of seeing King of Sweden.
Oh my God.
And I said, that's interesting. I have Eliassons in my family. And I started just going through this. And again, somebody has used this old ledger as a scrapbook. And I went to the person at the front and I said, I need to have this.
Yeah.
Because this could be the clues to some things in my family tree. Mm-hmm. And the lady said, sure, $20.
Oh my God.
And I said, okay, $20. But it was, I think, serendipitous that, again, it's out there. Somebody has access. And again, that's why genealogists like to work together. Somebody has access to the information that you're looking for. Yeah. It's just finding that person or being in the right place at the right time. I think it gives everybody a chance to pause and really decide that their ancestors, whether they knew them or not, that they had complicated lives just like we do. They had decisions to make, whether they're going to move, whether they're going to stay put, whether they are going to send their children to school or not. Should they buy that farm? Should they not? Being able to say, gosh, I had, ancestors that lived in the 1880s. Oh, they didn't have the technology. Their life must have been easy. That is absolutely not the case. They had very important decisions to make, just like you and I have very important decisions to make. It's just in a different context. So having current day people look back and think about that. Think about the kinds of decisions their ancestors had to make. Think about their immigrant ancestors. Right. Who is it that made, I think you and I talked about this before, who is it that made that incredible sacrifice to come to the United States? What did they have to do to make sure that the lives of their children and their future generations would be better off than they were? There was somebody in our family that had to make a huge decision, and understanding that and appreciating that is really, I think, what genealogy research is all about.
And it can be easy to feel like you are just this one story, right? Like I'm just living my life in my one story, but really my one story is a story that's in the context of all of us who came before me.
Absolutely.
And I think especially I notice that, for instance, my oldest, well, really neither of my kids knew my dad, but my oldest is so much like him. Yeah. And so when you have that nature-nurture debate, it definitely wasn't a nurture socialization piece because they were never alive at the same time. Right. And so when you see, wow, how can he have characteristics that my father had when they were never together? Right. Like, a part of their story is in you. Right. A part of the people that they were is in you as well. And I think knowing, the more you can know about that, the more it informs your story as well.
Right. I am involved in a couple of different online communities, one that has to do with DNA, one that has to do with just people who help other people in the communities. But I also want to go out into specifically Vero Beach And so I've made a connection with Regency Park, an independent living community here, where I am working with their clients there, their residents, to help them learn more about their family history as well. So it's that people to people touch, that getting in once a month or so and sitting down with residents and saying, how can I help you learn more about your family history? It's been really rewarding.
Okay.
The whole point of me starting Jumpstart Genealogy was because I was interested and I was excited about projects myself, and I was telling people about it, and they said, gosh, we'd like to be able to do this too. So Jumpstart Genealogy started as a way for me to help people start the process, get a jump start on it, because the main reason why people are overwhelmed by it is the time, and again, that initial flood of information, just like I experienced with my dad the first time that we looked online. And so I wanted to give them a head start. I wanted to say, here's the online search, or here are the results of an initial online search. Let me help you figure this out a little bit and maybe what directions to take. And my initial idea for Jumpstart Genealogy was then to just hand that back to people and say, here's the initial information or documents. Here's my thoughts on maybe where you could take this. Have fun.
And off you go. Okay.
What I've found, though, is that people really want to be interested in the process, but they don't really want to do it because they're afraid that they're going to not do it correctly. And part of it is sad because there's really nothing that can go wrong. Okay, you just get experience and you keep moving forward. But so Jumpstart Genealogy started with helping people start, but it really has morphed into kind of a threefold idea of a company. The first is to work with clients in whatever way possible. If you want a lot of help, I'm here to give you a lot of help. If you want a little bit of help, I'm here to give you a little bit of help. If you want to get into a genealogy society or anything, I can help you do that. Whatever it is. And there's lots of communication, and I give lots of feedback, and I'm constantly in touch with my clients about what I'm finding and where I'm going, and making sure that I'm answering the questions that people want. The second part of Jumpstart Genealogy is this curriculum idea, is to help students learn how to do the research and be able to put historically significant events in the context of their ancestors. So the title of the class is Teaching History Through Genealogy, One Generation at a Time. Okay. So we go through the first 4 generations. In the first year class, we go through the first 4 generations. They do an autobiography, they interview their parents, they do a grandparent project and a great-grandparent project.
Cool.
And then in the second semester, they do these 3 bigger projects. They do the project for a client, which I've talked to you a little bit about, so they're accountable to somebody else. It's a pretty basic question because I want it to be on their level and their skill level, and I want it that they can find some sort of resolution to it, but to be accountable to somebody else, not their teacher, not to me who's intimately involved with it, is important for them. And it's actually the highlight of the year for them to do that. A lot of teachers are clients.
Cool.
And so that's fun to get the school community involved. Being able to do that with the education, because I'm passionate about education as well, being able to meld these two together has been tremendously just beneficial to me and inspirational to me. And then the third part of Jumpstart Genealogy, which I'm looking forward to taking off more, is being able to plan and work with families in family reunions.
Cool.
And I've done it for myself. I've done a family reunion for myself. I had a blast. It was so much fun. I would love to be able to coordinate family reunions for people.
That's great. So you help them just with the logistics and getting everyone together. Oh my gosh, what a beautiful thing, right?
But I do hope that what my kids can see from this, and they're at the age that they're starting to understand, but I do hope that my kids will see that when you can find something that means this much to you, when you find a passion, and you can figure out how to interweave that into your life and have that balance, it seems like more work, but that is the balance. I don't know if I'm making a whole lot of sense, but if I didn't have this in my life, I feel like I would be floundering. And yes, I would be busy with school, and yes, I would be busy with my family, and I would stay busy, but would I have that purpose? And because I can bring together my passion for education, my passion for my family, my passion for history and genealogy research, because I figure out a thread to bring those all together, that has become my purpose.
You can find Keira and learn more about her work on Facebook or Twitter by searching @Jumpstart Genie. That's @Jumpstart, Genie. Thanks for listening.